I would be really upset if my Abra account went away. That's exactly what you want as a founder, right? Who's excited about his product. You want to be really upset if your product has to go away, not just because you might have to get a job, but because you're going to have to use a different product.
Hey friends, welcome to Smart Venture Podcast, the best information for future CEOs. Starting a company is easy, but growing and managing it is hard. In this podcast, we sit down with the best founders, experienced leaders, and investors in tech and relevant space to give you the best tips to grow your company and grow yourself. Some of our most popular episodes are about crypto founders and investors. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a 5-star. If you have a business, you need a website. What's the best way to get a website up and running? By choosing a company that makes it simple, like Pair Networks. Pair has over 20 years of experiences managing the entire digital ecosystem for thousands of online businesses all around the world. Pair makes it really easy for you with do-it-yourself website building tools and features, including simple drag and drop page design. And they have guaranteed US-based support technicians ready to help you whenever you need it, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Right now, when you sign up with Pair Networks, you will receive 1 free month of web hosting. See for yourself how easy it is to build your website for free. That's pair.com/grace to get started today. Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
I've been listening to many of your podcasts. So I heard that you're from New York and you studied computer science in college. You worked for CIA, NASA, Goldman Sachs, and joined Netscape so later on, and then you created your own companies. So before we start off with other questions, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit. So I would love for you to talk about how you got into crypto and basically your career journey a little bit before that.
Sure. So my, vocational background is in computer science, math. Spent a lot of time working on Wall Street, and after that in Silicon Valley on tech. So I have a background that spans both financial markets as well as new technologies, from Internet 1.0 and payments, credit card technologies. So it was like almost a dream come true when I saw that there was finally let's call it at a high level of payments technology that existed that could finally bypass the existing system and was completely trustless and basically checked all the boxes on kind of that cypherpunk holy grail of money and payments. And it was almost too good to be true when I saw it. But yeah, I've been doing capital markets and financial technology for a long time. And Abra is kind of a dream job because it brings both of those together in a way that really holds with my ideals and values and just excitement about technology in general.
Yeah, totally. So after you've worked at the CIA, NASA, and Netscape, which was one of the top tech companies back in time, when you were figuring out your career choices, what do you see as your unfair advantage and how does that translate into Abra?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really young energy in the crypto space, right? I'm constantly working with people in their early 20s to mid 20s as kind of the experts in different parts of this. And I'm nowhere near that age. And so, I have to make sure I can keep up. And I think that my advantage is the fact that I've seen so many different things and have so many different experiences that a lot of the young, brilliant people that I work with don't have. And that I'm able to give them and hopefully impart a modicum of wisdom on occasion that transcends just their raw, amazing, expertise and knowledge. And so the fact that I've been working in capital markets and technology, and Abra and crypto really represents the integration of both, I think does give me a pretty strong advantage in running Abra, having maybe some wisdom about having seen certain things before. Now with the macroeconomic conditions, which I have to talk about all the time, I've lived through a lot of this before, and I was obviously much younger, but I think I get it in a unique way. But I think that serves me quite well. And look, when you're running a fast-growing company, the more experiences you have, especially when you've done things wrong, the more likely you are to get them right. And so, I think a lot of people are also now getting the advantage of the fact that I've made a lot of mistakes over the years, and now I seem to be getting it more right than wrong, I suppose.
Okay, so I'm curious, you mentioned that like you have been through, I guess, like this cycle. Like what was it like back in time? And then like since like, you gave a talk in 2012 when Bitcoin was like $5. So you're definitely one of the OGs. So curious, like from your perspective, how did the industry shift? And then like, right now, like Bitcoin or the crypto industry in general is finding a lot of like really different use case than like back in time, or I wouldn't say finding, but it's more like popularized, for example, NFTs and other adaptions. Like, so curious, like from your perspective, how was the industry different from back in time?
First of all, when I was doing my research on the talk in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was more about like trading at like 50 cents. By the time I gave the public talk, because so much work went into preparing it, I think it was at $5. No one had ever given a public presentation on Bitcoin that I had ever seen. There were some videos, some early videos from some original supporters, I think Roger Ver maybe, but I had never seen a public talk before. And so I didn't know how to explain it. How do you explain Bitcoin when it's never been explained publicly before? So that was a big challenge. And so, what's changed significantly is that there's hundreds of thousands of people that kind of understand the basics of Bitcoin, if not millions, right? Whereas before there was zero, right? Outside of maybe Satoshi and Gavin and some of the other early developers. And so, that's really different, right? When you have a community and an army of evangelists, you can do amazing things. And that's what's happened with Bitcoin and crypto and Ethereum to some degree, that they all have Solana, pick your project. Many of them have their kind of evangelical army that does a lot of the work that I was basically doing just as a party of one, giving a TED talk. So that's the biggest change by far, is this kind of network effect that has taken place, and it needed to take place. Either it was going to get network effects and be successful, or it was going to get no network effects and just kind of become, an interesting article in some magazine somewhere. And thank God the former is what happened. And that's really the biggest change that I can see. And then, going back even further, to my really when I was a kid, it was when we were going through stagflation, right? In the late 70s, early 80s, when I was just a little kid. And I remember the effect of interest rate movements and huge inflation. And it's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of things about it that feel the same right now, except we didn't have the internet. We didn't have Bitcoin. You couldn't talk about things in real time. You didn't have internet money. So it's a very interesting change versus going through it as a little kid.
For sure. What do you think in the society kind of adapted? Like, why did more people, I guess, like want to learn about Bitcoin? Like, what happened in the society that kind of like push us to adapt more into the crypto space?
Well, if you study, there's a whole kind of course of study around scientific revolutions and Thomas Kuhn's work at MIT and others who basically, I have a minor degree in studying the history of science and technology and society. And certain things just have their place in time, meaning that society is ready because of all the things that have come before, right? Somebody hypothesized private money. There's a very well-known book from an Austrian economist who hypothesized what would happen in the 1970s if we had private money. But there was no internet, there was no cloud computing, there was no peer-to-peer technology. So the idea of there's no public-private key cryptography, all of which basically are required to make Bitcoin work. So the idea of private money makes a lot of sense if you're an Austrian economist in 1975 and you've just come off the gold standard, right? Because basically the big bargain has been broken, right? The contract was broken. So that all makes sense. But now in 2010 or whenever it was hypothesized, probably 2008 when it was first hypothesized, the idea of trustless money, the primordial soup was there. You had the internet, fastest growing technology of its time. Smartphones grew faster than the internet. And then peer-to-peer services, remember the music file sharing stuff that happened at the end of the .com era, which is necessary for Bitcoin, hence Bitcoin, BitTorrent, right? And so then Bitcoin's time had finally come. It wasn't guaranteed that we were going to get Bitcoin, but its time was right, okay? And you needed the history of Bitcoin to be there, meaning its predecessors to be there, in order for all the pieces to be able to come together, because no one person could know all those pieces or invent all of those pieces, right? Just like you needed the internet for smartphones to make sense.
Totally. When you're thinking about like Abra as a product, so yesterday I was like, again, like I was listening to your interviews. So basically, you guys use Prime Trust as a partner. Basically, from my understanding, as they serve as a custodian. Curious, like how do you guys kind of work together? So after I put my money into Abra, like does it go straight into Prime Trust, or like how does it function within?
Yeah, let me explain the basics of Abra and what those accounts mean, and I think it'll put it in context. And we have a pretty conservative perspective on regulation, which I think gives a lot of our customers a lot of comfort that Abra knows what they're doing versus other companies. So we run basically 3 different account types in Abra today, and there's a 4th one coming. The first one is the trade account. The second one is the earn account, and the third is the borrow account. And you as a consumer can choose which account you want to use. And if you ever use E-Trade in the US, for example, they have E-Trade Bank, and then they have E-Trade, the brokerage account, and then they have other accounts as well for, home mortgages or whatnot. And they're different, physically different accounts, and they'll actually have different terms of service and legal structures. And it's similar with Abra. The trade account is where you store cryptocurrencies, just a basic custody, no interest, and you're able to trade and exchange between any crypto assets or dollars or one of like 50 foreign currencies if you're outside the US. Okay. And that's basically the equivalent of a crypto brokerage account. Then we have our high yield account, which is where you earn interest on dollar stablecoins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Stellar, and a bunch of other tokens. And we'll be launching staking into those accounts very soon. We also just launched CPERC staking for our rewards currency. That high yield Abra Earn account is issued in partnership with Prime Trust, which is effectively a trust bank. And the idea being that, you can pay interest into this trust bank account. And so they also, from a legal and compliance perspective, oversee the issuance of that account, the payment of interest, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a very solid regulatory model for being able to pay interest on crypto assets, which is a very new concept. And so there's only a couple of ways to do it legally. And we've chosen this route, I think, as a viable kind of model. And for those users who are in the US, for example, they'll get like what we call in the US a 1099 form, which is basically if you've ever had interest in a bank account in the US, at the end of the year, you get this 1099 to be able to report your interest income on your taxes. It's very similar.
How does it function, the regular bank that's different than like a crypto bank? Because since you guys are generating between like 7 to 13 APY, it's kind of like a lot higher than the traditional banks that you guys I think you mentioned previously, like a lot of it where the bank was like holding from the customers. And it seems like there's like different risk profiles as like the bank was technically backed by the centralized system. So like how does it work differently? And then why is it like a lot higher?
So I would say there's 3 things you need to understand. First, a traditional bank is using your money to make money for themselves, not for you. Okay. That's why when you deposit into a savings account at a bank, your interest is a fraction of like maybe 0.05% today. Right. And trust me, the bank is making a lot more than 0.05% on your money. It's just that the vast majority of that income is going to them and not to you. At Abra, with our crypto model, we do the opposite. Okay, so the vast majority of the interest goes to you, and Abra makes a small profit in exchange for providing that service to you. So it's literally the opposite of what a bank does. Okay? Then in the US and in many Western countries, you have this idea of government-based insurance against a fiat bank account or government-regulated bank account. Right. And generally in the US, the insurance company is the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Company. And effectively what that means in English is that the taxpayers pay if a bank goes bust. So they socialize losses across the entire economy as opposed to just that bank. And the challenge with that is if you're a high net worth investor, it doesn't matter because they don't cover your losses for the most part. So the FDIC is really meant to protect relatively small depositors in the case of a bank failure, which has never happened. To my knowledge, in the last 50 years, I'm not aware of an instance where the FDIC had to step in and cover losses. During the 2008 financial crisis, when a lot of banks were on the brink, the FDIC, to my knowledge, didn't have to cover any bank losses. They did force banks to merge to protect consumers, well, in their mind, to protect consumers. I don't think they did, but that was the idea. So the third point is that the basics of crypto banking and traditional banking are more or less the same, with some key exceptions, right? So our banking model includes a brokerage where you can actually trade between cryptocurrencies. And we let you use cryptocurrencies as collateral to borrow against. Now, that's traditionally been something that only the wealthy can do. So for decades, the wealthy have been borrowing against their General Electric stock or their AT&T stock, and now their Microsoft, and now their Apple stock. I have customers at Abra who for a decade just held Apple shares, and they lived off borrowing against those shares because the shares kept going up, and which is an appreciating asset. The dollar keeps losing value, so you want to borrow in dollars, which is the depreciating asset. So Abra is doing exactly that now, right? But for crypto. So you can hold Bitcoin and Ethereum. And if you hold, let's say $100,000, we'll give you a $15,000 loan right now for free, 0 interest, right? If you're holding, we'll give you the 15% of the Bitcoin or Ethereum that you're holding as a 0 interest loan. And I mean, that's a fantastic deal because you're borrowing, again, in a depreciating asset while you're holding the appreciating asset. Okay. So structurally and legally, there's some similarities, but as you can see, there's a lot of really important differences that I think make crypto the future of banking.
I was wondering, so as for like risk wise, like what do you think are the difference between like crypto banking versus like traditional banking? I personally just feel like people are more familiar with the traditional banking. So a lot of it was just like happening in people's mind. But like, I mean, since I would never consider myself as an expert in anything. So like to educate the audience, like what are something that crypto banking are doing that could be viewed as like risky for a regular person?
The US banking system is effectively collateralized in 3 things: United States treasuries, home mortgages, and commercial mortgages to some degree, and consumer debt. Now, the mortgages, you can claim, okay, that's probably the one aspect of the economy that's backed up in real world assets, but it's highly leveraged. As we saw in 2007, it's basically a managed house of cards. And when you don't manage the house of cards correctly, it starts to buckle under its own weight. Nothing's changed since 2007, except we've propped up the house of cards a little bit better than it was before there was too much leverage introduced into the system. So those are the 3 things that collateralize the existing banking system, right? The crypto banking system is collateralized in cryptocurrencies. Now, Bitcoin, as the best collateral I think the world has ever had, right, is basic as digital gold, is guaranteed scarce, as opposed to US treasuries, right, where last year we printed 40% of all treasuries in circulation, which is insane. Why would you want to hold something, right, that's supposed to have value if you believe the government is going to keep printing what you have? So as an example, as a kid, I used to collect baseball cards. Okay. And, the Holy Grail was always like a Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle baseball card, right? They were worth millions of dollars, or the Babe Ruth, certainly millions. And I think the Mickey Mantle, hundreds of thousands, maybe now more because of inflation. And what if you found out after you paid all that money for that card that instead of the 10 that were left in circulation, there were 10 million? Well, it would stand to reason that the one that you held wouldn't be worth much anymore. That's exactly what happens with US dollars, but no one complains about it. Doesn't make any sense. We just keep printing more and more and more, and we're not surprised or act a little surprised when the money that we already have becomes worthless, right? Inflation means something becomes worth less. That's all it means. The word inflation doesn't sound as scary, right? So the government likes the word inflation because they've convinced everyone, the great con is that inflation is good for you. There's nothing about inflation that's good for you. Nothing. It takes what the assets you already have and makes them literally worth less. And so now with a guaranteed scarce asset like Bitcoin as the basis, the collateral basis for the future of banking, it's actually going to be worth more over time because of its guaranteed scarcity. It's the opposite of inflationary. It's what we call deflationary. And Ethereum, as the future of computing, is also becoming deflationary, which is astounding, right? So now you have the two kind of backbones of the future of the banking system getting massive network effects and being deflationary at the same time. Which would you rather have long-term as the backbone of the banking system? Artificial money that the government just keeps the meme burr, printer go burr. That's when they keep printing more money, more and more money. They just make it up. All it is dead trees. And the perception that it's worth something versus a hard asset that's guaranteed scarce, right? That digital gold analogy is really good. So anyway, so that's my perspective on the difference. And it's very hard for people who have been entrenched in decades of the existing system, right? Especially people over the age of 60, to understand that they've been basically led, given, spoon-fed a mouthful of lies for the last 40 years, especially, right? But for the younger generation, certainly under 25, it's almost intuitively obvious.
Yeah. So when you were first creating Abra, like, what was the product different from what it is now? And what does it take to create something like this? Because it sounds like there's like a lot of like challenge in like basically the political arena as well as like technology wise. Curious, like, can you walk us through like how you kind of started this company? Previous to that, you also did a lot of like innovation in the fintech sector. Curious, like, how does that translate into your current job?
A couple of great questions. So let me kind of try to unpack that. So over the last kind of 15 years, I've been very focused on bringing payments and digital banking and digital money transfer into the global economy. And I really think that capitalism is kind of the only known tide that raises all boats. It's the least bad solution that we have to figuring out global prosperity, right? And creating equal access for a high quality life for everyone. And so I've always believed that having access to basic financial services and payments and lending, borrowing is key for that. And so as a result, I've spent a lot of time in different parts of the world, working on payments, money transfer, remittance solutions, and constantly fought battles with regulators and existing banking systems who were not highly incentivized to support people who are disadvantaged, disenfranchised, whatever your favorite word might be. And so I really wanted to start a company that I thought that eventually could completely democratize access to all of these services. I thought that, now back to your question, I actually originally thought that payments would be the first kind of step. That was wrong. I think that, I thought that people would gravitate to crypto to do money transfer first, because money transfer, if you're poor, can be very expensive. The problem with that is all of the different pieces that you have to have in place. So think about Western Union for a second, right? It's not just Western Union doing a money transfer. You have a cash window on one side, that's a store or an outlet, and there are probably 600,000 of them globally in the Western Union network. And it took them decades to get them onto the network. Then there are banks that connect those cash retailers to Western Union. And there are thousands or hundreds at least of those banks in their network all over the world. So to replace that network with just say, okay, let's just use Bitcoin. It's not that simple, right? You have millions of people, literally millions of people using Western Union and their competitors right now every day to remit money home, remote workers all over the world. They're not on a dime just going to flip and start using some cryptocurrency that they don't understand how it works. And most young people who are remote workers, right, sending money home are sending them home to older people who often don't have a bank account and don't trust a third-party stored value. They go right to cash, meaning they pick up cash at the window, and that cash is all gone by the end of the month, and then they're getting the next remittance. So telling them to trust this digital currency stored on a smartphone, which they probably don't even have anyway, is a non-trivial thing to do. And so I don't think that was in hindsight the right place to start, but I do think that's the future of payments and money transfer. Right? Because it does provide equal access for everyone, which is, why we're all here. So it turns out that trading, lending, borrowing were the killer apps out of the gate. And I think payments is going to come around again as a killer app. And I think it's a big focus of mine right now for the future. So, we have Trade, we have Earn, and we have Borrow as the key accounts today. And I think Pay is going to be the next big thing in this space. So we're kind of getting there to the original vision, but we're getting there maybe from a different path than I would have originally guessed. And that was just biased based upon my own experiences at the time, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like some really interesting observations. And I'm curious, like when it comes to, I guess, like since you're the CEO of your company, like when you first started, like who was your first hire? And then now you guys have like 153 employees according to LinkedIn. You recently hired a CFO this month. So curious, like when it comes to shaping your own company, how many people are working in the engineering front, and how many people are working in like finance front? I guess like what is a company's made up?
Until you have product market fit basically means that you have a group of users who don't want to give up your product, meaning they feel that their lives would be better off if you existed versus if you didn't exist. And it would be very hard for them to go back to doing whatever they were doing before. Until you achieve that level of product market fit, almost your entire team should be product focused, right? There's really very little excuse unless you have like if you're a car manufacturer, there's kind of table stakes that cost you to have to become a big company in order to make one car. Okay, I get that. That's not what we're doing. Okay, if you're making a smartphone app or a digital service or a cloud-based service, achieving product market fit should require as small a team as possible that is completely product focused. Get those customers to be willing to talk to you and to talk about your product. Then you've made it. Then you have to scale the rest of the company as quickly as possible in order to acquire customers, figure out a repeatable acquisition model, sales and marketing, build a finance team, deal with all of the compliance and legal aspects of dealing with a fast growing compliance banking system. But if you don't get that product market fit, you're wasting money. And you want to waste money at as slow a rate as possible until you get there.
When you're thinking about your product, do you feel like it's more of like a tech product or more like a finance product? Since like there's a lot of, I guess your background, from my understanding, have both, but like I feel like you're more techie person, as you mentioned when you started hearing about crypto. So curious, like when you were creating your product, what was the most challenging part? I guess like is that basically meeting the standard of regulation, or like do you feel like a lot of it were just like the technology front to make sure it is secure?
I mean, when you're running a company that does what we do, you have to understand a lot, or at least a whole bunch of things about a lot of different things. So I have to have intelligent conversations, not only with my tech team and product team, but my legal and compliance team, our finance team. I'm constantly, our marketing team, our high net worth sales team, and I'm constantly recruiting and helping them recruit in all of those areas. It's a never ending process to manage scale and growth. And that is a really interesting challenge. I mean, my passion is technology. I've worked in capital markets, so I understand how they work. I understand macroeconomics. I didn't study macroeconomics, but I can hold my own with any macroeconomist talking about the future of money and capital markets and kind of macroeconomic conditions. But that's after, decades of study and learning and trial by error and trial by fire and whatnot. So, first and foremost, my passion is technology, but our users don't really care about my passion. They care about what Abra does for them. And so we are very sensitive, first and foremost, is Abra the product that we all want? And we treat ourselves as our customers first and say, okay, we want it, great, check. Do we think that there's another 100,000 people that want it? Okay, great, check. Well, what about another million? And then another 10 million? And then you have to really iterate and listen very carefully to what everybody's telling you. And you have to go from being kind of early adopter friendly to being mainstream user friendly. And those are big challenges, big challenges, because what an early adopter like myself is willing to do and what, the average American might be willing to do to get their crypto and manage their banking life are very different things. And you have to understand that difference.
Totally curious, like after you've raised, like how do you grow your companies?
So we've raised about 85 million over 3 financings. We operate globally today in over 100 countries. Our primary country is the US, where most of our assets under management are based, but we have customers in literally over 100 countries. We have a very large user base in Southeast Asia. We do have a large user base in Central America and South America, but also Europe, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we are definitely a global company, but I would say that our roots were in the US, but now we're definitely scaling globally.
So when you're thinking about like which company to scale first, how do you kind of like picture yourself like going after these market? Because there's so many different complicated financial situations. Curious, like when you're thinking about expansion, like after you guys were successful at the US, like how do you figure out like which country you want to go first? And then there are probably a lot of legal battle in different countries. How do you kind of make sure that like, you know, when you land to a country, it can scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every company has to think about this for themselves. Who your target customer is, how you scale that target customer, how you acquire customers, the cost of acquisition versus the lifetime value of a customer, right? That lifetime value equation versus cost of acquisition. If that doesn't work for you, you are literally going to be burning cash forever. And that is not a good business model unless you're an NGO, nonprofit that has to go out and raise money every couple of months. Right. So for us, the right model is very much top down. So I believe that in 5, 6 years, 10 years at the most, right, every person in the world is going to want to use a crypto banking app. Every person, whether you're the poorest farmer in the poorest country to the wealthiest Wall Street investor, it's all going to be the same. Okay. So the question is, how do you get a service like that out there and in what steps? And the reality is it is expensive to market services like this, to build brands. And so as a result, we have to take a top-down approach for now. What that means in English is that we have to start with the wealthier consumers and then move towards other rungs of the socioeconomic ladder over time, working our way across the entire spectrum, because effectively what happens is it does get cheaper over time to create awareness, create network effects, and acquire those customers. Hopefully to the point where it costs almost nothing to acquire customers by the time we're dealing with the poorer customers in our system, who may not even make us any profits, which I'm totally fine with, as long as Abra is a sustainable, viable, profitable business in general. And so today, because I can afford to just subsidize every customer in the world, we do have to focus on the profitable customers, which is what we're doing. And in general, that's my recommendation for a startup is, if you can't be profitable and sustainable first, then you're focusing on the wrong thing. And generally, unless you're in this very rare environment where money is just totally free and there's oodles of it, right? Like Uber's timing was perfect because when they were scaling, money was free. Well, money's not free right now, right? The party's over. Right? Interest rates are going up, VCs are scaling back, valuations are coming down. You need to focus on getting to a sustainable, profitable, repeatable business model with high margins, reasonable cost of customer acquisition, customer acquisition after you subtract profits, damn well better show that you have a net profit margin. If not, you don't have a sustainable business over time.
What is Abras' business model?
So we make money in 3 ways, right? We have our trading business, our high yield business, and our lending business. On the trading side, we don't charge trading fees, but there's often a spread between the spot price and the price we have to pay to fulfill your transaction. And that would be a profit for Abra. And then there's the high yield business. As I said, most of the interest that we pay in the Abra Earn account goes to the consumer, but Abra does make a profit on those interest payments. And then third is the lending business. So if you're borrowing against your crypto holdings and you're borrowing more than 15% of your holdings, there's an interest rate, and that interest goes to Abra to service the loan. And those are the ways we make money today.
So you mentioned like when you go to a different country, you normally would go for like, I guess like start with the wealthiest individual or like company. So when Abra just started, like how do you get the first group of customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really a slog. You spend a lot of time, and it's digital, right? So you spend a lot of time on social media. You spend a lot of time at events. meetups, talking to the press, basically talking to anyone who will talk about your product, anyone, getting links out there all the time, being willing to handhold new users one at a time. I can't tell you how many people I've personally onboarded. It's got to be thousands over the last 5 years, right? Every week it's multiple people. And so that's the gig, right? You have to be willing when that flywheel has no momentum, you have to be willing to stand behind it and push until it has momentum. And that can take years. And that's the way it goes. If you're not up for that, don't do it, because there's no other way. There's no secret sauce. There's no trick. There's no smoking gun that's all of a sudden going to make you take off. It's just slow, steady, hard work. Eventually, if you're lucky and break through, you get that hockey stick, but it could be, a decade of hard work between now and that hockey stick.
For sure. When you're thinking about your competitors, who do you consider as your, I guess, like direct competitor, and how are you guys different from each other?
Sure. There's probably look, there are tens of thousands of traditional banks all over the world. I would say in the crypto banking space, there's probably 6 or 7 of us that matter, that are doing the vast majority of the lending, investing in DeFi to generate yield. And we're all similar in some ways, different in other ways. We have the deepest brokerage book, meaning we give you the most crypto assets, let you exchange between the most pairs of cryptocurrencies. We have a very large number of cryptos you can earn yield on, and we're the only zero rate lending service out there. So that gives us, I think, a really good blended service model, super easy to use, only one that I believe is globally accessible. You can wire in infinite amounts of money from anywhere in the world. I don't know anyone who does that besides Abra. So there's a lot of key differences. We get a lot of people who try our competitors and then are like, no, Abra is just better. I don't have limits on my wires. I can make infinite interest. The customer service actually responds. So it just, I don't know. I think we've really focused and thought it through. And to be honest, we built the product that we wanted for ourselves first. And I said, okay, I'm going to put all my money in this personally. This is what I wanted to do. And it turns out that if you do that and you're really excited, I can't imagine not having Abra as a user of Abra, not just as CEO, but as a user. I would be really upset if my Abra account went away. That's great. That's exactly what you want as a founder, right? Who's excited about his product. You want to be really upset if your product has to go away, not just because you might have to get a job, but because you're going to have to use a different product. Or there may not be a product that meets my needs, which in my case, I don't think there would be. And then the question is, it's very unlikely with 8 billion people that you're the only one who wants that product. It is possible. You have to admit that, but very unlikely. And so if you do that and you have that approach, and then the question, of course, is how are you going to find those other people? If the product is that compelling, you'll find them.
Why are crypto company started buying banks? I was chatting with some other crypto founders and they're like, oh, buying banks. I'm like, what does that mean? What does you are buying the bank mean?
I predicted a couple of years ago this would start happening, and it's already started happening. And there's 3 reasons really. The first is that crypto companies are appreciating at an exponential rate and banks are barely appreciating. Right. And so that means in English that the crypto companies are basically now worth more than the banks. Okay. Just because something is worth more doesn't mean worth, less to you, doesn't mean, and you can afford it, doesn't mean you should buy it. But there's 2 other advantages that the banks have. One, large capital base. So if you're in my business of lending, you basically get access to a lot of low cost capital, right? Because if you're holding Bitcoin and I want to lend you dollars, that's predicated on the fact that I have the dollars to lend you in the first place. And that's driven by my deposits into the high yield service. So you basically get this kind of circular symbiotic relationship, just like any other bank, between deposits and lending. Okay, some of it's commercial. We have institutional lending, which is most of our business today. And then we have our retail lending, which is also growing, but not as big as the institutional yet. So having access to that capital base means you can grow almost infinitely. Okay. And then, of course, it's the regulatory requirements for effectively running a bank. And as crypto and traditional banking merge, the backgrounds or the regulatory models for running the business that the average user or institution might not see, but they're there, become more and more like traditional banks. And so it helps to have that leg up by actually having that infrastructure already in place. And so if it's a cheaper asset, you may as well just buy it you bypass the processes of having to go through licensing and all these other things. And now all of a sudden you're a crypto bank that's taking advantage of the infrastructure from the old world. And eventually that infrastructure might be thrown out, right? Because I think a lot of these borders are going to go away. Country-based regulatory bodies, I think like the SEC, FDIC, I think in 20 years they're gone because these are borderless systems. But for now they're there. We have to respect them. The law is the law. We can fight to change it, but while it's there, you follow the law, right? And we follow it aggressively, conservatively to the letter. And or at least our interpretation of it. Sometimes you don't agree with the regulators on the interpretation and you work it out. So until those things change, buying banks actually for some companies is going to make sense.
That's so interesting because it's just so new to me. I feel like this is so conflicted with the whole crypto theme. So like, I feel like crypto is about decentralization and then you're buying a bank. It's kind of like centralization.
Yep.
You also mentioned about your opinion on like, DAO probably not going to be like taking over or something because you feel like there have to be some sort of centralization. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, let's address that because I think that's one of the key points of what's happening in my world now is how do you reconcile this idea that crypto allows you to become your own bank with the idea that Bill's basically out building a global crypto bank. And I am. And let me reconcile the two because it's really important. And as somebody who's a libertarian cypherpunk at heart, why am I building a crypto bank to help other people centralize the storage of their crypto assets? And so here's the thing, right? I believe that one of the key tenets of crypto is that I can take it offline, take a hardware wallet, bury the key in my backyard, and no one has access. All right. Now, that's not the reality of what the average person wants right now. Okay. If they believe that they should hold some crypto, they want help doing it. That's the reality. Okay. We can all debate whether they should. It doesn't matter. The reality is what I just said. And I know I'm right because we have 2 million people doing it. Okay. But those 2 million people, myself included, at any time can say, withdraw my crypto to this address. I'm going to take it offline. No government actor has access. Abra doesn't have access, right? And I've now become my own bank again, right? So that ability to take the crypto offline while I still have access to this new kind of emerging crypto banking system means that one, right, I have peace of mind that I know how it's being managed because Abra is being transparent about what they're doing, right? And two, more importantly, if the shit hits the proverbial fan, I can take it offline, bury it in the proverbial yard, and not have to worry about some government actor who I don't trust, or Abra who I may not trust, whatever, being in the middle of that transaction. Okay. And to me, that's what it means to be a crypto bank. Because a lot of these services that are enabling people to buy Bitcoin or Doge or Shiba, whatever your favorite meme coin is, they don't even let you take a crypto offline. Well, that's not crypto. That's basically some IOU based upon the price movement of some other asset. That has nothing to do with crypto, right? Have I tested my ability to move my Bitcoin offline? And a lot of our users do that. They say, I'm going to put a lot of money in your interest account. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to deposit $100 in Bitcoin and I'm going to withdraw $100 in Bitcoin. If that doesn't work, I don't want to talk to you. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal to those of us who've been crypto. But if you are listening to what I'm saying, it's the first thing you should be doing. Very first thing. Don't trust what I'm saying, verify it, right? Then trust. So verify in our world means, can I go to a hardware wallet and go offline anytime? And the answer with us is yes. And if you're using one of our competitors and the answer is no, I would strongly encourage you from getting off of that competitor and looking at us or another company.
Totally.
Hopefully that kind of gives you the perspective on why I think people who are new to the space need a trusted partner to help them, like Abra. They want to earn yield, et cetera, or they want to borrow against their crypto. You can't borrow against your crypto if it's buried underground. Versus, hey, I don't forget about the borrow, forget about the yield, forget about trading. I just want to have my own crypto in a hardware wallet. And there's a bunch of my friends who are in the latter camp who love Abra, but they just want to have the key. But most people are in the former camp where they need help. They want to earn yield. Eventually, they're going to want to borrow against the crypto, and they're going to need a service like Abra, but are comfortable because they can go offline anytime.
For sure. How are you managing your own money right now? So like, I think like over 50% of your equity are in like crypto. So curious, like, I mean, this is not financial advice for everyone who's listening, but
none of this is financial advice. I'll tell you what I do. It's very simple. Okay. And there's one change that I want to make that I'm hoping Abra will help me with by the end of the year. Without giving too much away. So I do have a bank account, a traditional bank account, because I have to pay my bills. That's the only reason I keep it open. It has a small amount of money in, and I basically get my salary in there. I keep what I need to pay the bills, and the rest goes into Abra. Okay. So all of my liquid assets are in Abra. I don't even hold any stocks anymore outside of my own Abra shares. Okay. So all my assets are either in crypto, Abra shares, or in cash in Abra earning yield. That's it. And if I need money out of Abra, it goes to pay a bill or buy something or whatever big purchase, which doesn't happen very often. I move the money back to my traditional bank account. Now, what I want to do is shut off my traditional bank account and just use Abra for 100%, because I already use Earn for most of my cash, all my crypto. And if I can pay my bills, go to the restaurant, pay the bill, go to the grocery store, pay the bill, pay my electric bill, whatever. If others have a mortgage, they can pay that, their rent. Then Abra becomes that account. That's my goal, right? And so I've stated publicly that my goal is that people who believe in crypto, believe in our mission, can shut off their bank accounts as soon as possible and just use Abra. And we're getting close, so stay tuned, but that's the next step, or the last step, actually.
Yeah, there was like a story, right? Like multiple years ago, the first transaction of like a real life transaction of Bitcoin was like someone using 1 Bitcoin bought 2 Visa. So I assume at that point it was someone transfer like 1 Bitcoin into someone's crypto wallet. So curious, like for now, like, since like Abra is about to like allowing people to pay through Abra to pay your like daily life activities, like what needs to happen in that case? So like, I guess like, do you guys talk to individual companies like Pizza Hut or like Starbucks or like?
Yeah, no, that's not realistic. You need to work with the existing payment networks to do that.
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to give it all away, but it's coming.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, you're asking the right questions. And on the payment side, I don't want to give it all away just yet, because my team doesn't like it when I do that. So stay tuned, and we're working on some amazing stuff in this area.
What do you think like are some companies that we should be watching in this space? It doesn't have to be in like fintech in particular, but in like, I guess, crypto or like the Web3 space in general that you feel like is exciting.
Besides Abra and just kind of this whole kind of crypto banking space, the two other areas that I'm excited about are DeFi, decentralized finance. I spend a very significant amount of time on different DeFi projects, understanding how they integrate with Abra, supporting the risk management efforts of our team to understand the implications of those services, what the risks are in using them. We go very deep in those areas. So I'm really excited about anything happening in DeFi, and it gets a lot of my attention. And then the third is beyond crypto banking at Abra and DeFi. The third area is the NFT space. You can't do what I do and just ignore NFTs. It's just growing too fast. And so, you look for Abra to enter that world this year, but in our own way that works for our customer who is not tech savvy, wants help, wants to buy NFTs, but doesn't want to deal with MetaMask and all that crap. So I'm really excited about all three of those. And they really kind of merge into the future of crypto banking to me, meaning that why isn't Abra acting as a safety deposit box for my NFT digital collection? Why can I access some Aave pool earning 20% with a small amount of my cash that I'm willing to take a higher risk on? Why can't I borrow from a liquidity pool? If there's these new crypto assets that Abra doesn't list, why can't I trade them on a DEX? Now, a lot of our users, that's way too advanced, but the world is evolving so quickly that what's advanced now is not going to be advanced in 5 years, right? You go back 5 years in the past and talk about ERC20 tokens, and it sounds like incredibly advanced, but now to the average consumer, it still might be. But inside of crypto, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that are now comfortable with that topic. That's amazing. that is happening at that rate. And so these things are becoming, closer and closer to mainstream at a faster rate, it seems like every year. And so we want Abra to be the place where people can go and have like that one-stop shopping for what becomes kind of that Web3 metaverse crypto banking service.
What do you think the future will look like for finance as well as I talk about NFT on my social media, and then there's definitely really conflicted opinions. People's argument is how can you use NFT, right? Beside as a high value ticket, as going to have access to just a bunch of celebrities or something. What is the actual use case for the technology?
Think of it like baseball cards. And like I said, I used to collect baseball cards. Or autographs from athletes, for example. If you buy at an auction an autographed baseball from, let's say, like Babe Ruth, it probably comes with a certificate of authenticity from a major sports memorabilia company. In the US, the largest such company is called Steiner Sport, I believe. And Steiner Sports will give you a paper certificate. Now that piece of paper, like a little rectangle certificate, will have a hologram on it, plus a signature from somebody important, and that certificate is meant to prove that one, this Babe Ruth signed baseball is authentic, and two, that because you're the bearer of this certificate, you own it. Right now, it's not in your name; it's just a certificate, meaning you can give it to someone else, and that new bearer of the certificate will be the new owner. That is basically what an NFT is. The NFT is not the baseball. The NFT is the certificate, right? And that's what's non-fungible token, NFT, is the certificate itself. Your rights to that baseball are not equivalent to my rights to the Renoir painting, all right? Hence non-fungible, all right? And so the question then becomes, restate your question, what are the opportunities for having those digital rights, like the Steiner certificate that I talked about, be encapsulated in digital form, in bearer form, that are trivially easily transferable, sellable, auctionable from person to person to person to person forever? Well, because these certificates are programmable, they have a whole bunch of capabilities that the Steiner paper certificate doesn't have. One, you could program in that royalties get paid to the original artist or the original signer. Let's say it's a digital signature from Babe Ruth. Every time somebody resells it, Babe Ruth makes $1. Just made that up. But you can program that in to the NFT, into the contract, the digital signature, okay? Or, there's a 10% royalty to the auction house every time it gets resold person to person. Or it can only be resold 5 times per 10 years, right? All of these limitations can be programmed in, or rights can be programmed in. But basically it acts like that digital version of that certificate of authenticity and ownership.
For sure. What about the future of crypto banking? So since in China, so I was originally from China, so we have been using QR code for a long time. Curious, what does it look like for me to, let's say, go to a Starbucks or something down the line?
So that's the best place to kind of wrap this up, right? So what does this look like in the future? I think the future of banking is going to be we're going to move from what was originally supposed to be a gold-based standard, which we've now capitulated on is not happening because governments just print money at will, to a new standard over the next few decades that is a Bitcoin-based standard where Bitcoin becomes the reserve asset. You will still have yuan, you still have dollars and euros, maybe 5 or 6 global currencies that are used for ephemeral payments, but are not used as reserve assets. China may have certain restrictions on what you can do. The US may have certain restrictions on what you can do, but effectively we're going to hold something like Bitcoin as the reserve asset. And we're going to borrow at the point of sale to buy that cup of coffee in the depreciating asset, which is the dollar or the yuan, right? And either you get a permanent low cost or zero cost loan against those crypto assets because the bank wants to hold the appreciating asset, right? Or, you'll just do it yourself on an open peer-to-peer market. Hopefully you'll do it through Abra, but there are going to be other ways to do it, right? That's the backbone of the future of banking. Ethereum-based contracts will be doing all of the banking transactions. Bitcoin itself will be the reserve asset. That's my prediction.
Totally. So we have a 1-minute fire round for you. So
Okay.
First question, what's your favorite book?
The Ascent of Money.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
All the mentors that I've had over my 25 years before I became a CEO.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh God, my closest friends that I want to talk to all night.
Where can we find you outside of crypto?
Running trails here in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Silicon Valley, on a plane usually to places like Miami or Singapore or London, or playing with my kids.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill, for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. This is awesome.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.